Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the fourth lecture that we give on this theme of the passage, let's say, from figuration, or from, let's say, even the landscape to abstract art. We'll deal today with Riopelle, but Riopelle never does the things like everybody else. He did the reverse. He starts with abstract and end up by figurative. But in fact, you will see it's the same problem in a way, because there is a problem of passage, and there is, of course, a link with this concept of place that I have discussed a few times already. The coming back to figuration in Riopelle coincide with the rather disturbing, let's say, change in his technique. As you know, he was using a lot the knife to paint this heavy impastos of his most known picture. But then suddenly he began to use the spray can, this spray paint from cans, like I would say a vulgar graffitist, somebody making graffiti in the metro or on the walls of the building all over the place. And this is disturbing in a way because after all he had already used so many more conventional type of technique. And he, at the end of his life, he says also in interview very often things like, maybe just to shock, of course, the interviewers and us indirectly, there's no more painting, there's no more paint, there's no more color, no more brushes, all this disappears. Says, come on, Mr. Riopelle, go to any artist material shops and you will find them. Oh yes, but they don't know how to do a right brush anymore. They are not what they should be, and the color is the same. So that's why I use the spray can. Of course, one of the reasons, of course, it was that it was easier to use because he suffered from arthritis and whatever, any physical problem. But there is this kind of disturbing coincidence, let's say, with this. And I must tell you the truth, my first impression of these works was not very good. I entitled one of the texts I wrote about Riopelle, Impression négative. And you will see, it was not my intention, but some colleagues of mine said, this is your judgment on him. He make on you a negative impression. Not exactly, you will see. Anyway, it's true that at first sight, I was taken aback. The first time I saw that, it was in Saint-Cyr, a little place near Paris, near Mantes, if you want, where he used to have a huge garage. And you enter there, the first floor, you have maybe 20 cars, I mean really collection cars, like say Ferrari and Rolls Royce and things like that, 20 of them like this, and then you climb a little stairs, and then there he was, long hair, looking like an old shaman, I would say, and with a court around him, a lot of people there, a lot of drinks, and discussing of anything except art, of course, discussing of who is the best boxer in France at the time, who is the fastest car, and subject matter that seems to be, and I was at the time with Pierre Théberge, you see, we were supposed to exhibit him here for the opening of the new wing of the museum in 1991. And so all this lasted almost 6 hours, and without any decision being made of what we will show, how it will be, no answer to any question, just all this rambling. And then when we saw these things in the museum, finally, these last period works, the same impression was there, because then you could confront them even with the famous painting of the 50s and of the beginning of the 60s. You go from one room to the other, and then suddenly you end up with these last rooms. And again, people were asking me, what do you think of the last work? Meaning that maybe it's not so good. And I would say I changed my mind when I saw in 1993 at Michel Tétrault Gallery the big work was called Hommage to Rosa Luxembourg. It's hard to show it to you because, in fact, it's so big. It's 40 meters long, this piece, and it's in 3 sections. And at Michel Tétrault, they have represented it like in a U shape. You have 3 sections like this. It's now at the Museum of Quebec in Quebec City after an unfortunate stay at the Casino of Hall. Maybe Riopelle find it funny or interesting, but it was stupid, a kind of stupid move. Now at least it's in a proper place in a museum, but there, if you have visited it, you know that it's presented rather like in a Z shape, like this, the 3 section. They want to underline the fact that it's a kind of narrative piece, how you go from one scene to the other, and apparently each word have a signification without knowing the signification of all of them, because Riopelle didn't really comment one by one. But we have to tell, oh, this is the, it alludes to the Beckett show, and he will make some reference like that. So because of this narrative structure of the work, it is presented like this, like a thing that you should walk around and not see as a whole, like at Michel Tétrault's presentation. So what I can do, I can show you in parallel a few details, just to give you a feeling of it, and I will have to come back from time to time to other aspects of it during my talk. Then, of course, when you saw that at that scale, you begin to think, well, maybe it's more serious than we thought. The first painting looks a little bit whimsy and easy, and then suddenly you see, well, this is a real masterpiece. It's a big work, and it happens to be also the last important painting of Riopelle, as you know. It was done in 1992, and then there was already a problem with the title. Let's see, I want to go back here. Okay. And then here, okay, and then I think I had no, okay, I have just one detail. Yeah, okay. Then there was a problem with the title, with why homage to Rosa Luxembourg. As you know, Rosa Luxembourg was a famous socialist revolutionaire before the First World War. She is also the one who created the so-called Spartacus League against the government of the time, of course, against also the involvement of Germany in the war. They were pacifists, they were anti-nationalist also. And during the war, she was put in prison because her type of talk, of course, was considered very destructive to what they wanted to achieve. After the war, she continued her revolutionary work and was assassinated in 1919. So at first, okay, maybe there's a relation to a revolutionary in the mind of Riopelle, but it was not very clear. But there's one thing that he said, that he read the letters of Rosa Luxembourg that were written during her imprisonment. During the time she was jailed, she wrote few letters that were sent to friends, and these letters were coded, meaning that under some letters there was little signs that the, let's say, the censorship could not notice or know about. And from her prison, she was able to direct certain action and certain subversive action. And this, for Riopelle, this was very fascinating. And in a way, his own work, you will see, is a kind of coded work also. It's a way also that he identified to that. And I was satisfied with his explanation when suddenly in the metro, very recently, there's a guy who comes to me and takes me like this and he says, Monsieur Gagnon, have you read the letters of Rosa Luxembourg? So I was embarrassed because I didn't read much of them, just a few little commentary. And he says, do you know that she mentioned many times the passage of the wild geese in her letters? And indeed, this is interesting. I wish I knew his name of this poor guy. I could quote him in the bottom of a page when I will publish an article on this. But I says, who are you? And he says, I'm just a curious man, a man of curiosity, a man with curiosity. And he disappeared. So well, that's what happened to me in Metro of Montreal. But anyway. I will certainly read the damn letters to find out. But if it's so, and I believe him, why not? This team, of course, speaks to Riopelle also, because, as you know, he represented so many times these birds and these geese and all that, so it could be one of the explanations. But the other aspect of a kind of coded letter is also important, because it is a fact that we know that it was done at the time when somebody with whom he lived a long time, over 25 years, John Mitchell, who is an important American artist, was when he learned that she died. And this prompted the elaboration of this big work. And if there is a code there, it is, of course, a work not about Rosa Luxembourg so much, but about this John Mitchell, that he used to call Rosa Malheur. Of course, by playing on word on Rosa Bonheur, which is a famous feminist painter of the 19th century. You know that she was painting horses. She was a specialist of that theme. And so they were a couple for 25 years, but apparently very noisy and very not very simple. And they were throwing names at each other. She used to call him Bran, and as an insult, of course. The journalists have not understood that. And he was calling her Rosa Malheur and things like that. So the homage to Rosa is, in fact, the homage to John, to John Mitchell. And so this is the coded message, let's say, of the big work. What it represents, in fact, it's this reaction to when he learned that she was dead. And it's a person with whom he lived so long time and has so many souvenirs together, so he decided to make something, a kind of rehearsal of all their common life, in a way. And indeed, when the few scenes that we know about are about this theme, in fact. I always try to get this picture in parallel. No, it's not this one. Oh, I think it's this one, in which you see this is one of the central motifs of the homage to Rosa Luxembourg. And as you can see, it represents a bird, but with an arrow and a heart here. And you could say it's a kind of symbol of the death of John Mitchell. And very often you get these big circles also that are repeated all the time. They are like, of course, like to center the attention on this scene in particular, but also it's a kind of reflection of one of his eye problem at the time. He have cataract and he see these kind of circle things that you could be explained that way. But this scene in particular, I think it speaks well of what it is, the hidden message of the homage to Rosa Luxembourg. So then after, when I saw that, I said to myself, okay, how come that this so-called spray paint or spray can paint that he was used, we react so negatively at first. You needed to have the confrontation of this big work to begin to think that maybe it's not so bad after all. The first explanation I can give of that, it is a kind of nostalgia of his previous style, of course. And it is in comparison to what he was doing in the 50s in particular that we find it less interesting, or that we were more critical about it. And indeed, if you put together some of the work of that time, you can ask the question. I just give you a composition of the 1950 and the Circus, which is a painting that is owned by this museum of 1955, just to illustrate that. Of course, this is the great period, but I'm not sure that when we refer to that as the great period, we always understand exactly why it's so important and what was the issue then of this painting of the 50s in the Riopelle time. And to explain that, I want to go back in the past, and I will show you a few Cézanne pictures, because Cézanne is really like the turning point in modern art. If we understand well what it's all about, you will see which direction that Riopelle was trying to take in these type of painting. So first, let's go back to one of this famous still life of Cézanne. And at first sight, well, there's nothing to be too excited about. Some apples on a plate, maybe a kind of sugar bowl, I would say, and a pitcher for a jug, milk, something like that. A kind of tablecloth who seems to be just put there without too much reason. And at first, you say, okay, there's not much to discuss about. But when you look at it more carefully, you get the impression that what seems so solid at first sight in a Cézanne picture is in fact the result of many small decisions from the part of the painter, as if each thing that is represented there was decided about, was not clear to begin with. For instance, the fact that the angle of the table, if you look at the two corners here, you will realize that this table is very much folded over toward us. So much that some critic at the time used to say that all the things on the table would just fall on the floor. See? It's as if he had put little blocks on the two hind legs in the back like this, just to present it even more toward us. This is the first thing that you could say. Then if you look at some details, like I think I showed you last time also, if you try to follow the edge of the table here, and then the edge of the table from the other direction, you will see they don't really meet. As if Cézanne have kept the idea of what we see from the left eye is not exactly what you see from the right eye. And the two sensations, like he used to say, I want to be faithful to my sensation, are kept as such. And this is, of course, the reason why this tablecloth make a triangle here to hide this lack of connection between both. It's not by hazard that you have this little piece of cloth here. It is because it hides the lack of connection between the two edges. So a thing like that it could be done just by using a ruler and making two straight lines. Seems to have, in the contrary, be a problem for Cézanne, and he solved it in a kind of not completely satisfying manner, as if the problem is there, but it's not resolved, or it's the resolution, if there's one, is hidden. It's not really revealed. Then look at the sugar bowl, and you will see, okay, normally these two handles on each side should be perfectly symmetrical. There's no reason that one will be more squished and the other a little bit more open. As if, again, this kind of symmetrical form, allant de soi, if you want, is now treated in a kind of a weird way. Also, the handle of the picture here is really parallel to the surface of the painting. Is not in a proper disposition. If he was really in perspective, it would be a little bit toward us. The opening of the picture also is almost too much folded, like the table, toward us also. If it was really painted in perspective, you will not see so much of inside of the picture. You will see just the edge, but not inside. Finally, if you try to situate the whole table in the space there, it's not very clear either. Okay, we are inside because there is here a kind of maybe a hat holder or something. I don't know what it is, but you see feet of something there. And then you have this black surface here, who could be or a part of the floor or a part of the wall. And there's no way to decide, really, which is which. And it makes a kind of ambiguity of the situation of the whole scene in the space that is represented there. So the more you look at it, the more you realize that all this have been, in fact, like the process of hesitation, of decision-making from the painter in order to what? You ask yourself, so why not to represent the things as they are? One of the explanations, the classical explanation, I would say, the Clement Greenberg type of approach to that, it is that, like a modernist, Cézanne wanted to index the surface, wanted to show us that a painting, before being the representation of a three-dimensional thing, is in fact a surface, is in fact a bidimensional thing. And what he does, in a way, it is to make a compromise between a three-dimensional representation, will be like in real life, if you want, and the flatness of the canvas. So that's why the table is halfway through, let's say, in perspective, and to be completely flat like this, to be parallel to the surface of the picture. That's why also eventually that the traces that you have around the apple, the pears, and even the opening of the picture there are ambiguous. It's as if you have two systems to represent it. Or you represent volumes And then it's clear, especially the apples and the pears. They are clearly volumes in space, and they have a limit by themselves. Or you trace a black line around shapes to really make them stand out. There's a word of Cézanne which is interesting where he says, les contours m'échappent. Meaning the contour escapes me. I try, and you have probably seen some of his watercolor in which he repeats many lines like this of contour. I didn't bring a representation of that, but I guess you know what I'm speaking about. As if you had an hesitation of where the contour stops, where it should be. If it's a line on a sheet of paper, if it's the way to represent the contour of an object as a line on a sheet of paper, you affirm then the flatness of the sheet of paper. If you represent volumes in space, you make it less clear. You represent that three-dimensional thing. And again, you have this hesitation between those two. So, as a modernist painter, let's say Cézanne not only painted reality, but also made a critical, or if you want, a reflection on the very act of painting. That could be one of the signification of that. But I don't think this is enough. This is going far enough. What Cézanne is dealing with, and there you will see, I'm coming to Riopelle finally with this. What he's dealing with, it is, I would say, the indetermination of reality. The fact that what we see is not really so well defined that we should know right away what it's all about. For instance, the physicists told us what is real. They tell us, for instance, that color is just waves. They tell us also that any object that we see are in fact a kind of a cluster of atoms or molecules, and of course we don't see that, but this is the reality, this is the real thing. What we see, it's real color, like in our experience, or shapes, or form, and in a way what we see is something that resists to this type of description that the scientists give us. It's what the philosopher called the cite. I don't know how to say that in English, but it is the characteristic of being a thing. A thing resists to this type of analysis that scientists can do by presenting itself as color, as form, and it's exactly, of course, at that level that the painter deals with reality. He's not trying to show us the real things like really they are, like the scientists tell us they are, but what we are dealing with when we look at them. And of course, then it's indeterminate. It's not so clear, like in the definition of the scientist. And there is a lot of hesitation on what we should choose as being real, as being just an impression of it. What gives the sensation? So Cézanne is, in fact, dealing with this indetermination of reality. And that's why he have to make so many decisions to decide, well, okay, I will present the form this way or that way, or there is another possibility. I could put my table less tilted and much more in perspective. All this is become kind of a free choice of the painter in a way. We have the impression that this is not right because we know what is a color, we know what is a shape. But in fact, we are relaying most of the time to habits. We don't look at things carefully like painters do. I always try to find a wall. We think that the wall is all the same color, but if you look at it carefully, you will see there's, because of the lighting, there's certain small difference. And of course, a painter, if he wants to paint what he sees, he will begin to attach importance to his sensation, to what is really given to him. And he will see many colors where we see only one. There was a famous comparison done by Schopenhauer about Kant. He says it's a little bit like somebody who wears green glasses all the time and think that the only color of the universe is green. But when you remove his glasses, you have the surprise to find that the world is full of colors. You could see with Cézanne, we remove the glasses. Suddenly we see that things are much less familiar and much less solid than we think. And indeed, at the end of his life, toward the end of his life, this process of decision becomes more and more evident, I would say. In this view of the Mont Saint-Victoire that he has produced, we say always 1902, 1906. Since he dies in 1906, that means, okay, it's really one of the last work of Cézanne. You could say, okay, you can still maybe make the shape of the Mont Saint-Victoire itself, even if it's almost the same color as the background. But the foreground here seems to be very tangled, very difficult to read. What is the foreground and then the middle ground and all this seems to be given almost the same thing. As if also, at the same time that Cézanne discovered the indeterminacy of reality, he discovered also that the paint that he used is indeterminate also. What he put on the canvas coming from the tube is also just matter. You could do whatever with it. And there's a kind of coincidence like this. The world becomes more and more unfamiliar, more and more difficult to read, and more going toward a kind of non-form, if you want. And this is why I think what happened with Cézanne, I says he is a crossroad in modern art. Because there's two possibilities from there. Or you go back to the form, like he did, and you decide to make forms and to give them shapes and all that. Let's say you could put in parallel, where is he? Oh, this doesn't fall. I had a Picasso there. Okay, you have to believe me. Any Picasso will do. It will be one of the solutions will be then to go toward form, to create form. The man as a kind of form builder, as somebody who decides what it will be. Or the other possibility is to go in the other direction and to go toward the inform, to non-form. And I wanted to put Picasso on the left and John Mitchell, for instance, on the right, just to give you an example of her work, because with let's say Jackson Pollock and few others, and Riopelle of the 50s, I think what they were fascinated was with the other side of the Cézanne proposition. Not to go toward form, toward the more familiar things, but to go in the contrary toward the less familiar and toward the non-form if possible. And then, of course, this is more risky. This is more dangerous in a way. You don't know what will happen. You could end up with a kind of mess, say, that you look at a painting and it gives you nothing. You just seems to destroy everything, all the shapes that you are familiar with. Or you go to the assurance of form. It could, if you have read a little bit about Riopelle, you may be surprised that I use Cézanne instead of Monet. Because indeed, Monet was a... Where is he? Ah! Bon. Okay. This is the Picasso that appeared for 1 second. Where is he? Don't touch it. Okay, so that was a good example. Okay, why I chose this one is called Le Guéridon. It's in at the National Gallery in Ottawa, so since you can see it, it's a more familiar one. What I wanted to oppose is this: the two ways, the two possibilities. From Cézanne, you could go toward a painter that will create form, or you have painters who will explore the non-form. And I think where, in fact, Riopelle went also during the 50s. The habitual reference... okay. Thanks God. Stay there a little bit, because we never know what will happen. In French, I call it les moyens idiots manuels. Okay. I was saying that... You are nice to follow me. Anyway, I was saying that habitually, if you read about Riopelle, the painter that we made allusion is not Cézanne so much that we refer to habitually, it's rather Monet. But then we have to be careful. The Monet that interested Riopelle in Paris, and some of his American friends at the time, including John Mitchell, Sam Francis, and few others, it was the Monet of the end of the life of Monet. Not the Impressionist Monet that we all know, but really Monet of Giverny, of the last paintings were, in a way, very disturbing. You know that Monet at the time had a heavy case of cataract and was absolutely frightened to get operated. And I could understand it when I learned how they were doing the operation at the time. They used to call it needling. So they went with a needle, they just pierced your your cornea, and they push the lens inside, and it falls in the eye somewhere. It's supposed the eye. It falls there, and apparently with time it gets destroyed and dissolved like this. So when Monet learned, and more than that, the doctor that was supposed to operate him was called Monsieur Coutelas. Coutelas in French will be, in English will be something, not only a knife, but will be like a saber, right? It's something horrible. And so he said, no. So he postponed, of course, the operation as much as he could. One eye was better than the other. He thinks all the time he was saying, oh, I see better this morning. It's wonderful. It's healing. A cataract will not heal. It will just improve worse and worse. And so he resisted to it. And not only that, he suffered also what we call xanthopia. Xanthopia, if you know a little with Greek, xanthos means yellow. So there was a kind of yellowing of the cornea also, and that means even the color was transformed. And he thought that, like Beethoven could play music even when he was deaf, he could paint also even blind in a way, because he could read at least the name of the color on the tube and things like that. But in fact, that was not, he was correcting all the time these works. And Clemenceau used to visit him at the time and said, stop correcting, you destroy what you did. You made a masterpiece yesterday and you transform it, you are destroying what you did. So in fact, what Riopelle and his friends were interested in, it is the period of Monet art, where Monet was even obliged not to rely anymore on sensation. And he was dealing more and more with heavy impastos and correcting. This is the famous Japanese footbridge series. And if you don't know what it is, of course, it looks like completely abstract. And even, I don't have example of that, but if you go further from that, at the end, he made some Allée de Rose who looks almost like a kind of mud, I would say, a purple mud with some very acid yellow appearing here and there, and a very, very difficult painting in a way, almost abstract, but always with title like Allée de Rose, Pont Japonais, and everything, as if nothing happened, you know. They maintain Nénuphar and things like that, and what you see, it's kind of blurred like this completely. So they were fascinated by that, because in a way, these type of painting were putting in question the very idea of relaying to your sensation and exploring something else, exploring in form. So what it is directly now in the painting of Riopelle, first, it is paradoxical, this enthusiasm for Monet, when you think of his very first teacher, was called Henri Bisson. He's not a famous painter, but he was probably a kind of amateur painter, but he was very realistic. The first lessons that Riopelle received from this Bisson was to paint the things as they are. They were copying calendars, reproduction, and Bisson used to tell him, well, Monet, this is bad. This is not what you're supposed to do. This is terrible. The guy doesn't know how to paint. So it's paradoxical that it's Monet that have so interested Riopelle after. Then, of course, the one who will open the eyes of Riopelle is Bordeaux, because he will be a student at École du Meuble, in a furniture school. And Bordeaux was a great admirer of Cézanne. And you could say, well, suddenly the revelation of modern art, of what it is all about, could come from Bordeaux. But even then, there is a kind of automatist phase in Riopelle work, like this little aquarelle could be a good example of it. It's called Ô Mère, but Oh My Mother, or something like that, Ô Mère in two words, and it belongs to to François Sullivan collection. It's a little watercolor about that size. Okay, could illustrate a little bit this automatist style of Riopelle. But when he went in Paris, very soon, in 1950, he participated then to an exhibition was called Véhémence confrontée. This is hard to translate, like each one being confrontation of many propositions among painters. There was a little painting of Pollock there. There was also Georges Mathieu or people like that. It was in a gallery in France. And then Riopelle produced a text. And it's surprising because Riopelle after will always try to look like a lumberjack and a man who doesn't speak of art and all that. But in his early days in Paris, he thought it is good to write about your painting. And he says that automatism was dépassé in a way. What he was about now is to deal with pure hazard. But he associates hazard with consciousness, and this is interesting because it's exactly the way you will paint. You start a painting without, of course, any preconceived idea, like the automatists used to say. But during the process of your painting, of the building of your painting, you are very much aware of what's happening. He says, this is why I could not have a witness when I paint, because it will be a distraction. And Riopelle at the time was known to be able to pass 24 hours with a painting without interruption, without even realizing what happened. He says hunters are like that also. They enter the woods and they lost the conception of time. So I believe this. Usually when you are in the wood and looking for a moose, it's better not to think, oh, it's too late, we should go back, and you have to find a moose. So this is the comparison he gave, and I think that in a way, what he described is a kind of a second state of mind, a kind of in which you are so immersed in your work, so conscious of it, so aware of what's happening, that you cannot be distracted and you cannot do anything else. So he proposed this thing. And what he reproached to the automatist style, in a way, was that he says, if you work only with the unconscious, and if you are not aware of what's happening on your canvas, the risk there, it is that you will repeat the same gesture endlessly. And if you want, you could illustrate that with one of his early paintings, still under the influence of automatisme, with this one who's called the Green Parrot and Perroquet Vert, and which is at the Museum of Quebec, in Quebec City. And in which you see more or less what he says about the repetition of a gesture. So you have these little curves that are repeated all over the surface like this, and are repeating themselves all the time like this. And the risk, of course, if you are not conscious of what you are doing, it is that you will go toward this facile genre in which you could just repeat an unconscious gesture many times. Well, he will not stay there long, and will find finally, very often, I would say rapidly, his own style with these big abstraction. This one is called Abstraction Orange. And just, he gave a kind of just a color as the title, 1952. These are good example, of course, of all-over composition, like I was defining to you last time, a composition in which you have no focalization, no point where you can focalize your eyes specifically. Everything is more or less of the same interest. And also in which you don't have much of a hierarchy between the elements. This type of painting done in '52 in Paris was very surprising for the art critic in Paris, because they were not used to that. They call it a non-composition thing. And one of his friends, Georges Dutuy, who was a very brilliant man and wrote beautiful texts about Riopelle, tried to describe the feeling he got in front of this type of painting, and he was saying, this is completely physical painting, meaning that's a painting done without the spirit, without the mind. He says, no, maybe this is too hard to say, I must say, but it's completely instinctive. It is as if we were at a stage when the sensations are not yet distinguished between themselves. And he says, you should put some empty space in which, where thought could enter, as if Riopelle was making a painting in which l'esprit was completely excluded or removed from. I think this is an interesting reaction of a French critic in front of an all-over composition. When he will show that in New York, he will have no problem. Right away, people will compare this to Pollock, and they will find it kind of a good example of expressionism, abstract expressionism. The first big show in which Riopelle was in New York was called Younger European Painter. And of course, he was presented there like a Parisian, not at all a Canadian. He is from Paris, and he's among the younger European painter. Of course, the American avant-garde was very wary with this show, because this was revealing new people that nobody knew at the time too much of after the war, like people like Vols, like Bram van Velde, like Polyakov, Vera da Silva, and the Americans said, oh no, not again. The School of Paris will like a phoenix, will start from his ashes and will invade us again. And they had, of course, on the other hand, there was after a younger American painter show right away where Greenberg says that Paris is dead and New York is alive and things like that. So it's exactly, and it's interesting to see that Riopelle was there at the time. Bourdieu, at the same time, when Riopelle was, everybody speak of him in the press, was showing at the Passe-Droit gallery. Nobody knows what Passe-Droit is, where, and things. It was not an important gallery. It was her first show of abstract painting. She always presented much more tame type of work, I would say. She was French, and that's the reason I think that Bourdieu chose her, because he could speak French with her. But Riopelle right away succeeded to get in the big show at the Museum of Modern Art with Sweeney catalog and things like that. And this is very typical of the two career, if you want. So that was an example. After this, you have this type of painting like Autriche that you have here at the museum, in which you could say maybe he finally understood what Dutuit was telling him. Put some empty space that in order that the mind could enter and could find a place in this type of things. But in fact, even the emptiness, apparent emptiness of that is full because, as you know, all the painting is covered with the same type of impastos. It just happened to be white instead of colored. But I don't think that Riopelle was so much, let's say, giving in to what Dutuit was proposing. And this period will end up probably with his masterpiece, which is called Pavane, and which is at the National Gallery in Ottawa. It's a huge painting that invades completely your field of vision. If you are about, I would say, 6 or 7 feet from it, it's so big. Each section will measure more than 2 meters, except the middle one, but the two big one on each side. And it's about 2 meter high also, so it's really big. It's a wall of paint in a way, a little bit like in the Balzac novel of Le Chef-d'œuvre Inconnu, a wall of paint. And with, I would say, maybe 2 movements on each side, it seems to go up, and in the middle, it seems to go down. So it's a very well organized, very well satisfying type of painting. But also, I must add that this type of exploration of the non-form is risky and dangerous. And you do have some composition of Riopelle where you feel that he's losing ground, where the gesture take over, where the color get messed up, and suddenly you finish in a kind of not completely satisfying painting. To explore the non-form is risky. Because you are in the unknown, you are in the non-familiar, and you go on and on like this, and you may lose your track. Okay. So first argument, I would say, why we were astonished by the last painting, it is because we remember these things. Maybe we didn't have complete explanation, but we used to like them, and I think the reason why we like them is this, because they are exploring another side of reality, and they were, most of them were satisfying. But when we go to the recent stuff, this is a photo of whole Riopelle painting with a spray can. It's not an imagination. So meaning that he worked also on a table like this. The big work, the homage to Rosa Luxembourg, was done on a table, meaning with 2 rolls. It's a little bit like a Torah, you know, in the synagogue. You have a roll here and a roll there, and you just go like this, and you read only a part of it. So he was painting just a part of it, never seeing the whole work together. That's why it's narrative in a way. You could deal with one scene after the other. There's no known chronological sequence between each scene. Probably one after the other when you feel like it, or you remember something and you improvise from that. There's no sequence, let's say, a chronological sequence. The effect, of course, is of that nature. you realize that he could use a lot of things, birds, but also even a oar of a canoe on the left there, other object, anything that fell on his hand that was put on a canvas and then sprayed over and then removed. So he obtained, and this is of course, the meaning that I was intended when I speak of impression négative. It's like if you put an object and you spray above it and you remove the object, you get a negative impression of the object. That's the way he was working. And it is this, of course, this usage that right away make an allusion to I would say an aspect of our modern life that's not so sympathetic, the graffiti. And not the graffiti of the whole, the graffiti as you see them in the city of today. And especially in Concordia, we have a lot of graffiti around. We are building a new tower there somewhere, and we have this beautiful graffiti. There was a York Theatre also was full of them. Anyway, we see we are not far from them. And this is what we think when we see the recent Riopelle things. And indeed, I wanted to evoke that to you by a few photos. There was a time, but it's no more like that, thanks God. There was a time when New Yorker used to go in their subway and say, you live in New York. So that means at the morning you have the red eyes already from the pollution, and you just drink what they call their coffee. I don't know what it is, but they call this coffee. And so you enter in a subway, and then you see all the cars are like that, you know, with full of graffitis, some of them almost to the windows, and they change every day and all this. You go, some of them are so obtrusive that they cover the window. You know, here, when you were in the car, you cannot see anything. You just see paint. And so at the beginning, people were annoyed by that, but at a certain point, they got scared by this. There was too much of it every time. And indeed, you could ask yourself how they did that, how they managed. So the system was very simple. They bought the can first, but they don't bought it, they steal them. So much that the merchant around the metro, around the subway, decided not to offer them anymore. They could not get paid for it enough. So people were just stealing them and going. They enter the metro by night, and they were in the station, the main station, when the metro closed. And then they had 8 hours in front of them to work in peace. So they come habitually with little drawings, preparatory drawings, because what you see habitually on these things is what we call a tag. The tag is basically a signature. So it's few letters. We know the name of some of these guys, Dusty Shadow. This is wonderful to make. Another was called A1 Steph. I guess Stefan or something. Not Tech Days. Each one have his name. This is his tag. And so he made huge letters, balloon them, paint them the most outrageous color. And this is basically what the works is all about. Then in the morning, this is great. You think of it in terms of diffusion de l'art. All the cars are starting all over New York, local one, from west to east, Harlem to the Statue of Liberty. They go at the speed of light in every direction, and your masterpieces are going like this to the view of millions of people. No museum can compete with you. And so I could imagine for these guys, it was a fantastic trip. But like I told you, the public didn't appreciate it too much. So the modern transport authority of the Metro Transport Authority of New York have a change of direction, and the new director decided to stop that. So now the metro is not very clean, but at least there's no more graffiti like before. They succeeded to stop them and things like that. And so the people are not confronted to that. So when you think of it, what Riopelle, oh yeah, I wanted to show you one to show you that some of them had some philosophical think. You see, what is art? Why is art? Of course, this is a very crucial question. In fact, the New Yorker thought that the metro was going to the gangs, but it's not true at all. The graffiti are done by a very little number of people, and they are in competition with one with the other. One of them call it the styles war. The war of styles. And it's exactly that. They are, let's see, maybe 10 people at the most, and they are in competition with one of the other. As if the famous individualism of modernism was going to the street, and I would say even underground. This is why it's not so far from the modernist approach, because after all, modern painters also are very egoistic, they affirm themselves, very authoritarian, and all it. The modernism understood in his precise meaning, like opposed to postmodern, if you want. This type of attitude in which the painter is an individual who creates, who is original and all that, they had exactly that, except that they bring it to the level of the street. And that's why what Riopelle was doing was one of the tactics or the strategy that's very typical of the modernist period. It is to take an aspect of low art and to make high art with it, to transform it from low art to high art. I could illustrate this with few examples. Let's say, for instance, Picasso made this painting in 1912, and it's called Landscape with Posters. And indeed, you can see here K-U-B for cube in French. It will be a little cube that were used for soup. It's like Lipton soup, if you want. And you have Léon, of course, he was a sellers of hat and things like that. And you could maybe I could put in parallel a street of Paris at the time with cube, with the same. So this is, of course, you could say a form of low art. It's an advertisement, basically. And it's used in a context of a cubist painting and redeemed, in a way, brought to a high art level. And this is, I tell you, a tactic that you find many times in the modernistic period. Look, for instance, another example of the same thing, Fernand Léger, calling this painting le siphon, the kind of, how do you say siphon? Siphon, it's a way to look. And look the source of it. It's very, very close. So he went, not only he went to advertisement, but to find a very low grade of advertisement. Advertisement that you will find in a newspaper and black and white like this. And indeed, it's very close to it, as if he didn't change too much, except maybe the background, and he put his own style in it. But there is a kind of relation there between what is shown there. And I thought to myself, another example of that, of course, is the usage they made of so-called primitive art. This is of the same nature, and it's not very, very polite or very respectful of this type of art. It is considered like a form of low art that you could bring to the Occidental style. Also, they were using African masks or Oceanian works, exactly the same thing. And Riopelle himself did that with the famous series of Les Ficelles. Well, it is based on games that Inuit people used to do with some ropes like this that you put between two hands, and you change their form, and you create like this animals and plants and everything that you want to express. So Riopelle was fascinated by that and make a series of pictures like this one is called La Danse, the dance, which is exactly the same type of utilization. The problem for him was to try to find something that others have not done. So probably the Inuit source was less exploited, and especially not the ficelle. So he thought, okay, this is interesting. I will do something that nobody have done before. But you see, the relation with the graffiti is the same type. It is a kind of form of low art that you try to bring to a higher level in museum context or things. I was asking myself, can we find people who are much closer to the graffiti than these examples? And I thought, of course, right away of Dubuffet, because Dubuffet, first of all, I make my PhD on Dubuffet, so he's like a kind of hanging hanging presence in my life. Dubuffet had this idea that to renew art, you have to go against culture. You have to find anti-cultural works. And he was interested in graffiti for a while, but the graffiti as you find them in Paris, not at all like the graffiti that we have here. Paris is such a dirty city in a way. The walls are gray, full of soot that have been accumulated for centuries, and people don't clean them because you will destroy the monument. You know, be careful. When Malraux decided to clean the Louvre, there was a big uproar. You see, la crasse should stay there. You see, the dirt, because it protects the wall. Okay, but with this system, you could scratch in the walls your graffiti. For instance, Brassai, the famous photographer, did photos of these scratch graffiti. You see, and this, of course, what Dubuffet tried to imitate. He lived at the time near Rue Mouffetard, where you have tons of them everywhere, and they were kind of very low-grade type of graffiti. And so this one of an exploitation, but they have nothing. Then you realize that what Riopelle is dealing with is not this type of thing. It's not this, I would say, classy one, but more to the real tough one, the one we see in Metro and in the city of today. An American painter also who have used this type of scribbling, if you want, is Cite Twombly. And Twombly used it almost as the graffiti that you will see in toilets or something like, it looks like dirt in a way, but he gives to them beautiful title like Bacchanalia for this one. And so as if he was playing with culture, but in a completely different way of Riopelle. In fact, I thought Riopelle in spirit is closer to pop art. Pop art have not used graffiti as such so much, but they have used, this relation with, for instance, with Liechtenstein, the relation with comic strip, who is very close to what Riopelle wanted to do with the graffiti. This is a picture by Liechtenstein, and this is his source. We know even the name of the man who drew this comic strip. It was called Mr. Abruzzo. And you can imagine he was not very happy when he saw that in a gallery for a few thousands of dollars when he was selling his comic strip for 25 cents. And he sued Liechtenstein for that. He says, you copy me, I'm the creator, and you just... and there's a lot of discussion. It's an interesting discussion, and it's a good case in which a form of art is considered like low, like a comic strip, is brought in the context of museum, big painting, done with special color, just little modification, like, for instance, the color of the hair. And the reason for that, it is in a comic strip, you have to use your black in a kind of clever way. If you put too much of them, your page looks ugly, because you have all these little images. So sometimes they decide some of the girls have to have black hairs to make some contrast also. But of course, for Liechtenstein, this was much better to put a blonde, you know, since she said, that's the way it is. It should have begun, but it's hopeless. And of course, the title of the painting is hopeless. Another example where I don't care. I'd rather sing than call Brad for help. No, dear, call Brad. It's really not worthwhile. This bastard just to drop. And here you see the cover of the comic strip that Liechtenstein used also. So it's, I think, in a way, the relation of Riopelle with the graffiti is closer to these pop art example. And you could even make a case of a reverse influence. Here is a graffiti, of course, who's quoting Warhol. So you can see there's a circular type of, it's not so much an influence like a dialogue between the two forms of, this guy have some culture. He showed us, he called Pop Soup. He have created a Fred soup because it's done by his friend Fred. We know only the others, that you can read them. And of course, it alludes to the famous Campbell soup series of Warhol. So this kind of problem can go in two directions. When you, okay, this, I make a kind of general case with that. When you go closer to the Riopelle painting, and you look at them more carefully, you see, okay, he uses spray can. He uses shapes that seems to be taken like this. He works like these graffitis, except that the technique is not exactly like theirs. The first thing that you realize it is he's used real birds. For instance, in these two examples, one is called Mascarade and the other Manitou of 1990, almost contemporary with the homage to Rosa Luxembourg. He used real birds that he put on the board of, this is two boards of wood on each case that are, okay, put flat on a table, spray them over, and then remove the birds. And I used to ask him, so what do you do with the birds? Say, we eat them. As if it was a stupid question, you know, what do you do with a geese or with a goose? He said, you eat them. Yeah, but full of, anyway. And so it could be the same birds who's used, put in different shape. And then what he obtained is very specific. It's a way to create a shape without using a line of contour. And it's one of the rare ways to do this. There's not too many ways to make a shape without using a line. And even the ancients used to tell the story how painting started. And they used to think of the line also, because apparently Pliny tell the story. It was a shepherd who was bored and had nothing to do, and with a stick he used to trace his shadow on the ground. And when he detached himself, he had the first painting. And then there was a variation of that also, that a couple were very much in love, and the girl was going away, and the man traced her shadows on the wall to keep a memory of her face. But in both cases, you have a line. The beginning of painting is described by a line. So what, in a way, what Riopelle is trying to tell us, maybe the beginning of painting is even more primitive than that. We're going much further than that, and in which we don't use even a line. We just, we get a contour, but we get a kind of an empty shape, a kind of absence. And this is important because, in a way, when Riopelle comes back to figuration, it doesn't come back to the line. And he came back to figure who are in fact absent, who are like negative. Okay, he reintroduced figuration, but as absent. And when you think also of, finally, of the implication of the big work, Rosa Luxembourg, is about the death of one of his friends, okay, that also make another connection interesting, in a way that you are dealing with death, you are dealing with absence, we are dealing with somebody who is no more there. So all this becomes to be more and more solid in a way. And indeed, you have in modern art people who are work close to what Riopelle did that, using negative impression. One of them was suggested to me by Jean-René Ostiguy, who is a friend and an art critic, and he told me, he says, you should look maybe to what Yves Klein did. Okay, you probably pronounce Klein, but the French call him Klein. I don't know about Yves Klein, let's say, who is famous for his famous blue, the painting, all blue painting and all that. He did, maybe some of you have seen this old movie, it was called Mondo Cane, in which we see a scene taken from what I'm showing that with the bad slides. What he did, he asked some models to paint themselves with color, with blue, and to roll themselves on the canvas. So what you see there, it's the aftermath of the painting, because it's their feet that you see. It must be a very dirty proposition. The poor girls have to wash themselves fast after, not to dry with this. It would be horrible. And during the performance, he had a cellist playing what he called la symphonie monotone. Why? Because it was one note done by about an hour, like this, the same note, to create the atmosphere. And he himself was in blue smoking and all dressed and directing the girls, okay, roll there, roll there, do that, do that. Okay, what you obtain, of course, with this, in fact, it's a positive impression. If I put paint on my hand and I go on the wall, I will not have what Riopelle did. I will have a positive impression. Like, for instance, this one is called Anthropometry by Yves Klein. He called all of them, he gave them numbers and all that. Some of them are much closer to what Riopelle did, because you have the two system here. You have the blue shape in the middle is done by positive impression, but the shape on this part here is negative impression, exactly like Riopelle did. This is it's called the vampire, and all these the painting of Yves Klein is the beginning of the 60s, about in the period. Some of them are more ambitious in size. Like, of course, the personages you see them are real personages, so it's real size life. And it's called, he gave an English title for that, People Begins to Fly, because, of course, if you put them on the ground like this, you could give them any shape you want, and you could suggest like them, that they are flying. But you see that he feels the need also to fill the empty form, to put some colors inside here and to complete it. One of the most disturbing and more efficient, in a way, version of this series of Yves Klein is this one was called Hiroshima. Because you know that after when the atomic bomb have created, one of the effects, it was to leave in the walls of some building the shadows of people who were around. There's nothing left of them except the shadow, a little bit like you see in this painting of Yves Klein. So there is some relation here with what Riopelle do, but in another context, with another type of intention. I thought also of some photographer, because people like Man Ray, for instance, have made photos who are done without apparatus, without a Kodak, if you want, and consist to put objects on photographic paper and then to illuminate the paper and then to remove the object after. So exactly like Riopelle used to do. So you obtain that way what Man Ray called a rayogram, or rayograph. In which you could say, instead of a spray of paint, you have photon. You have photon who are thrown on the paper instead of the canvas. But basically, you have the same idea. And this technique was used very early, almost at the beginning of photography also, by a man called Christian Schad. And it was called shadowgraph, playing with the word shadow, of course, by Tristan Tzara. And this one was done in 1918, so much before Man Ray. And again, it's interesting, but it doesn't have the power of what Riopelle did with a similar technique, if you want, because there you feel it's like tentative a little bit. With Riopelle, you feel that it's a language. It's really assumed as a language, both subversive. That's why we were so shocked when we see them for the first time, and also profound, and also going toward many layers of meaning. And in fact, maybe what it's all about, after all, it is the very beginning of painting. And I could not think, when I saw this is the first scene of Hommage to Rosa Luxembourg, I could not think of some prehistoric drawings in which you have this idea of a negative impression of hands in particular. This type of presentation you do find in south of France and north of Spain, and one of the most famous one is called the Cave of Gargas, in which you have maybe, well, it's hard to calculate exactly, but maybe 100 of these hands like this stencil on the ground. And the technique they use is well known. They probably put the paint in their mouth and just blow it like this on putting their hands on the wall, and the wall was being a little bit wet. And that's why most of them are in reddish color like this, because we know that they use also black pigment, was done by manganese pigment, but this black pigment didn't hold well on the wall and habitually fall. But the hematite that they use, or the red ochre that they use, like in this case, was ochre already, was almost a limestone, if you want, itself, so it sticks to the wall very well, and that's why most of them are red like this. There's a possibility also that they use even a little reed and they should blow through it, and did exactly. L'Abbé Breuil, who was a famous prehistorian, used to speak of aérographe, like exactly that, a reed in which you could blow painting and obtain this thing. In Gargas, there is some disturbing element, because when you look at them closely, the hands are never complete. They lack fingers. They lack, in certain cases, even one phalange, and others, the thumb seems to be cut, and things like that. And the first impression we had is, oh, this is a horrible ritual, maybe where they cut fingers of people. In prehistory, you can have as much as imagination as you want, because nobody will check you. And so then a clever guy came and says, no, it's not that, it's much simpler. He says, why you think that they put their hand like this? Why not like this? And then you could fold your fingers as much as you want and obtain maybe the same effect. So when you look back to them carefully, you see that this is not possible either. Because first of all, how could you fold one phalange? Comment on dit phalange? Phalange? Joint, one joint. How can you fold only one? You cannot. Habitually, always a little bit of another come with it. First thing. Second thing, some of them, if we look carefully, maybe it's hard to see on this schema, but the part that remains there is not tapered like this. It's a little bit more wide. And as if really it's a badly healed type of wound. Then the other hypothesis, of course, that was brought, maybe it's sickness. Maybe it's people like lepers or something like that lose part of their fingers. And in a way, what Gargas was about, it was an imploration. You see, the whole little population there was attacked by this epidemic, and they put their hand on the walls to pray the gods to save them from that. The problem with this explanation, it seems logical also, it is that you find these hands all over the world, and not only in the south of France, but so if it's an epidemic, it's really a colossal one. For instance, this is an example found in Australia, which is exactly like the other one. You cannot really distinguish one from the other. It's the same idea, the same system. Maybe there the hand is complete, but you do have also other mutilated hands, and sometimes also you could have a positive impression, like in this Chauvet cave in France that I've recently discovered, but whatever the context, then again. And that's why the hypothesis of a voluntary mutilation came back as a possibility. And indeed, it seems that it's used in certain tribes when a person is dead. In order to remind the place of this person, they cut the joint of the finger of some of the member of the tribe, and they keep memory of that, as if one joint for each relative, and each relative a joint. So this is... And okay, so I said to myself, well, maybe all this is interesting, but it's not very relevant to what Riopelle wanted to do in his big work. It is in a way, because if it deals with death, if it is like a memorial of death, you could say, okay, this has a certain connection. But when you go back to the picture themselves, you see that it represents very often these birds. Okay, they can symbolize whatever you want, the person that he's lamenting about, but they are basically birds. And around them, what we see, it's a world that has nothing to do with the world of the birds. It is, for instance, this thing this is the Riopelle who is an amateur of cars, of course. This is a fan that's inside of a car. And you have nails here. You have bolts. You have maybe some other shapes to nails again there, a whore, whatever seems to fall on his hand. And then, if you think of it, there's an opposition here of an animal who is in fact hunted, who is dead, and is represented by an empty form. And on the other hand, the world in which things will have signification for him if he was alive is not his world. Is a world absurd in a way, who have more human quality than animal quality. An animal is, in a way, is without ego, without consciousness on one hand, and on the other hand, without a real world. Heidegger used to say is weltlos, is without a world. And he referred to this idea that the relationship of an animal with his world is not like ours, it's not like a kind of objective relationship. It's a relationship in which you are triggered by a certain stimulus, and you are dealing only with this. The rest doesn't exist much. I see that with my dogs as I was old. He passed the day sleeping or just looking like this and not doing anything. But the moment the frigidaire opened, this is a releaser of inhibition, then he comes alive and he comes to eat. This is the only language that he's interested in at 12 or I don't know how old he is, but okay, so that means there's a kind of very specific relation with the world, but also not a real ego, not a real subject inside. Like these famous zoologists who at school used to say, there's no such a thing in the animal world as an object, as something that could have signification outside of what is important to me for my survival or not. You know, for instance, that even a chick of a gull, the moment it's born, is already programmed to react to anything who is narrow, who is, will look like a pen in a way, and will go like this from left to right, right to left, and will have a little red spot. This is exactly what you see on the beak of his mother. But if you do it with a pencil, he will go to the pencil. Habitually, it's even better for him, so, because it's closer to the type of stimulus in which he reacts. I want to say that, so then, by using the symbol, in a way, Riopelle is suggesting that the dead person is like lost, is like no more a subject. And his world have no more signification since or lost. As if he was making a kind of reflection on animal life, but also giving it a kind of more metaphysical type of dimension. Maybe I lent a lot of meaning to Riopelle, but there's the fact that we are dealing with painting who used this kind of empty shape in a context which is very peculiar, the context of the death of his friend, and in which you could say you deal with the language, you deal with what was tentative before him, the little graffiti of Dubuffet, or the Yves Klein anthropometry, or the photo of Man Ray and all this. What is more and more tentative now becomes a subversive language. That's why it shocked us, and also a very profound one. Okay, thank you.